Okay, let's go. Now, the boy side, the truth of the matter is, Azoi, the Maimed as a Maimed is finished. In other words, what the Tzemach Tzedek is trying to say, he said. So I'm going to try and finish the rest of it, which is a page and a third. With 128, you see that I made two vertical lines in your text because the Maimed really finishes at the point that we just read. The rest of the Maimed is like a Fabrengen. Really, it's like the Tzemach Tzedek is going into Fabrengen mode. Now, what we learned in the Maimed was that the Tzemach Tzedek, I don't know how to say this, out the Rambam's the Rambam. He does more than the Rambam at the Rambam's own thing. But what does the Rambam tell us? The Rambam tells us that we need to find basis for the truth of Torah and Nevuah from Eidos. It's not enough in the miracle. We have to have witnesses. That's what the Rambam is saying. Now, I don't know what the Rambam's mucket is. In other words, is it in Gemara? Does the Gemara speak about this question? The Rambam paskins that when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that the Jews are going to watch, this was Eidos. They were witnesses to confirm the truth of Nevuah. They were witnesses to confirm the truth of prophecy. Right? So the Rambam says, what does the Tzemach Tzedek do? He says, I agree with everything the Rambam says, but. What's the but? The but is that what Hashem had proposed didn't happen. What happened was more than Hashem proposed, correct? Hashem proposed that the Jews are going to be witnesses, they're not going to become prophets. What happened, in fact, was not only did the Jewish people witness it, they became prophets themselves, right? Now you're supposed to nod.
Right.
So the quality of their witness is enhanced. The echos, the quality of their witness is enhanced, and the fancy words that the Maimed uses, it wasn't only Yediyas HaMetziah, it was a Sagas HaMelech. In other words, they didn't only know it 100% because they had proof of it, they knew it 100% because they experienced it. And that's what the Tzemach Tzedek is adding to the Rambam. So he's bringing in the Rambam, he's basing it in the Rambam, but he's out the Rambaming the Rambam. Right? He starts off with apostle, Eidos of the Shem Ne'amon Machim Es Pesi. Because of the Shem Yisharim Asam Chalev, the truth of Torah is something we know. Because of Eidos, the Rambam brings the pasuk from Wednesday where Hashem is saying the Jews are going to see and not going to hear, and the Tzemach Tzedek qualifies that by saying, yeah, but they did hear. They became Nevi'im, and therefore the quality of the Eidos is increased. This is what we learned. No reason to go back. You want to say something?
Yeah.
So that's what we learned. Now. So what's happening in this Maimed? What's happening in this Maimed is that we're playing down miracles. That's what we're doing. A miracle happened, don't get excited. Don't get excited, relax. We're playing that miracle. The credibility of Yiddishkeit is not miracles. It's deeper and it's more. You know, the Rebbe, our Rebbe, when he first became Rebbe, spoke about miracles. And he spoke about the power that miracles have and the power that our Rebbeim had to perform miracles and the whole thing. But the Rebbe said, he probably said it more than once, the truth of the matter is that what the Rebbeim are about is not miracles. Miracles are the secondary. It's really not a big deal. For a Rebbe, the miracles are not important, you know. The Tzemach Tzedek's wife, her name was Rebbe Tzachaya Mushka, grew up around the Rebbe's. Her grandfather was a Rebbe. Her father was a Rebbe, her husband was a Rebbe, and her children were Rebbes. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty good record, yeah? She used to call miracles kunsten. You know what kunsten means? Magic tricks. Like big deal. Kunsten. So she did a Gitana kunst. And she wasn't at all impressed, you know, she wasn't at all impressed. Big deal. Gemacht kunst. She's one of the people who said famously, this quote is found from a number of people. She's one of the people who said that the miracles were rolling around on the floor and no one had time to pick them up. The Rebbe said, you know, when you learn Chassidus and you're involved with Chassidus, the miracles are not the issue. The Chassidus is the issue. And the connection to the Eibush, which is the miracle, just, they help you along. You know, they just help you along, but it's not that important. And the Rebbe used to say to Chassidim that maybe the first thing that draws people to the Rebbe is the miracle, but if they get stuck there, it's very, very limited. It's not what the relationship is about. Having a relationship with a tzaddik is not because the tzaddik can help you. Having a relationship with a tzaddik is because of the tzaddik, you're going to get closer to Hashem. That's to use a criteria, to use a cliche, that's the miracle. You know, there's a story with the previous Rebbe that he was visiting Israel and he met a bunch of old Chassidim and they were talking about how great his father was. And this one said this miracle, and this one said this miracle, and this one said this miracle. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, I think, was kind of like turned off by it all. And he says, the größte Meifes von Taten that given between them. The great miracle that my father performed was the boys in the yeshiva. It wasn't that he made, oil into vinegar, vinegar into oil. It's that he took people. He did not perform a miracle, no. But he made them into super people. So where's the miracle? The answer is it's a miracle with depth. It's a miracle with value and meaning beyond just the nace. So this is what this Maimed has been doing. It's been saying miracles are important and miracles are powerful, but how do I say this? They're only miracles. It's not the real issue is the relationship with Hashem. Or to use the Rambam's words, a person whose whole relationship with Hashem and spirituality is miracles, simen sheyesh by doifi. It's a strong word. That person has in himself a lie. It's superstition almost. It's true. And if it brings you close to Hashem, it's good. But the point is not to celebrate the miracles. The point is to get to the depth. And that's what the Rambam is saying. That the credibility of Torah is not the miracle. The credibility of Torah were witnesses. And that Tzemach Tzedek takes it to the next level by saying, we didn't just witness it. We witnessed it on the level of personally experiencing it. Yup, we're good. So now that the Tzemach Tzedek downplayed miracles, now he's going to play miracles on. In other words, the end of the Maimed, Sif Zayin and Sif Ches, Sif Vov, Zayin and Ches, the last 3 chapters, Tzemach Tzedek is going to say, listen, I told you don't be spoiled for miracles. Miracles don't mean that much. They mean something, but they don't mean that much. But they do mean something on the other hand. Meaning to say, to identify yourself as a person because of the miracles that the Eibishter performs is doifi. It's not the highest level. But identifying yourself as somebody with a relationship with the Eibishter because of miracles is also not nothing. It's also not nothing. It serves a point and it has a purpose. And I guess I should throw in as a mandatory comment that there is actually an argument between our Rebbe and the previous Rebbe. I don't know if you know this, but our Rebbe was a big chassid of the previous Rebbe's. In case you haven't noticed. He was a very big chassid of the Rebbe's. But they disagreed on certain issues. At least it looks that way. You can't say for sure. One of the issues disagreed on was the question of miracles. The previous Rebbe was living in Latvia, in Riga, Latvia. Our Rebbe was living in Berlin, Germany. And then, of course, later the previous Rebbe moved to Poland, and the Rebbe moved to Paris. And during all those years, they corresponded. And the nature of the correspondence was the Rebbe used to ask questions, and the previous Rebbe would give answers. The Rebbe got the answers from his father-in-law, and he immediately edited it and published it, and that's another question. The Rebbe was pulling out of the Frierdiker Rebbe like you have no idea. He was milking him like you milk a cow. He just, whatever he can get. And over the course of the correspondence, a lot of very interesting ideas emerged. And one of the issues that came up in that correspondence was the place of miracles in Chabad. That the previous Rebbe wrote the Rebbe a story that in Chabad Hasidus, miracles were not the big deal. It was the Hasidus itself. And in other Hasidus, the miracles played a much more central role. Tzaddikim used to perform miracles. There were tzaddikim who perform miracles like you breathe, a mamish. Holy, holy people. And the previous Rebbe writes to the Rebbe that this is not us. We don't do that. We're into davening and learning, to avoid the pnimis. Okay, miracles occasionally have a miracle, but the point of Chassidus Chabad is not brought forward by the miracle. This was the exchange that they had. And the Rebbe writes back to the Frierdiker Rebbe basically that he disagrees. And it's very, very unusual because the Rebbe wrote a letter to Frierdiker Rebbe objecting to Frierdiker Rebbe said, and then he separately wrote for himself notes on that letter, further qualifying his position that we need miracles. And what the Rebbe writes is, maybe in times of the Alter Rebbe they didn't need miracles, but today we do. Maybe in the time that people were true Chabadnikim, Chabadnikim in the sense that it was using their mind to arouse their heart, to connect to Hashem. So deep people who were deeply involved in Avodas Hashem didn't need miracles. We need them. This was an exchange between the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe. As far as I know, when the Rebbe wrote this to the previous Rebbe did not respond. And if he did, we don't have that letter. But we do have the letter with the notes, where the Rebbe writes to his father-in-law, basically, in other words, without saying it outright, he's saying to his Shved, I don't agree. Maybe in the olden days we didn't need miracles. Now we must have miracles because the level of the Hasidim is lower, and we need all of these miracles to keep us doing what we need to do and going in the right direction and so forth. This morning, by the way, someone sent me a WhatsApp video. These videos are killing me. They're stealing my life. But we're going through a very difficult time. A woman is sitting in a television studio in Israel being interviewed by 3 other ladies. And she says, I look through the viewfinder of my door, and 5 mechablim, 5 terrorists are walking towards my house with their guns outstretched to break down my door. And you know what they did? She said, I took sakinim, I took knives, I gave them to my children, and I told them, this is not the usual time, and let's do what we can. Let's not go down without a fight. Kids. And then she says, I prayed to God. I'm not ready to die yet. I have things to fix. But if I live, I swear I'll keep every Shabbos for the rest of my life. And they went to the next house. You heard what I said? Imagine. I saw it this morning. I don't know where I saw it, but I saw it this morning. She said a prayer. She said, Abish, listen, I'm not ready to leave this earth. If I live, I swear I'll keep every. Wow! But wouldn't it be nice if we didn't need that story? Wouldn't it be a lot nicer if the miracle would be that we would know the miracle? There's a story with a man and a woman. I know 2 stories like this. The Rabbi used to sometimes tell people things that were very weird, strange. Didn't make sense. If you listened, you find out what was wrong. If you didn't listen, you found out what was wrong. And if you did listen, you never knew why. There was a couple living in Pittsburgh, and they got a message from them on a Thursday night to leave Pittsburgh before Shabbos and never to go back. And if they don't have time, they should have other people pack their belongings and send them to New York. So they got into a car. They drove halfway to New York, and they stopped on the road for Shabbos. They never went back to Pittsburgh. Other people packed their belongings and sent them to New York. Ada Yom, I said, they have no idea why. No have a clue. Why? Because who knows what would happen if they stayed in Pittsburgh? No one knows. A man told me personally, he's an Israeli. He got an instruction from the Rebbe more than 40 years ago, never to visit Israel. He hasn't been back to Israel since. His whole family lives in Israel, lives in New York. He has no idea why. He has no clue why. And so he asked me, why didn't the Rebbe tell me to go? You know what I answer him? As long as you stay in America, you're not going to find out why. And I think that's good. Because when you don't listen, when the Rebbe tells you one of these strange instructions and you don't listen, you'd rather have a third story, which is even a more beautiful story. I heard this man directly, personally. Him and his wife became from at a very young age, in their early 20s. And they became from very slowly. They didn't become from an yeshiva. They came from an Chabad house. They became from very slowly. Now they're Pashat Chassidim, Chassidish Yidden. But they became from very slowly, over years. And they became from as a couple. And she was pregnant with their first child. And there was some complications in the pregnancy. So their shliach said to them, write to the Rebbe. Now, they had just become frum. They were American Jews. And it was very clear to them that if you live in Israel, it's much easier to integrate into Jewish life. It's a fact. Baalei Tshuva moved to Israel. A lot of Baalei Tshuva that I knew as a child moved to Israel, and they did a lot better than the Baalei Tshuva who stayed here. The community is more supportive. I don't know the reason, but it's a fact. Baalei Tshuva who moved to Israel and raised their children in Israel, on average, their children are nicer than the children who were raised. I'm not saying chas v'shalom that if you raise your children in America, you can't have from Hasidic children, but it's harder. Maybe because of the language. If your first language is Hebrew, it takes away that whole challenge. So they just had to move to Israel. So in this note, which was about her medical condition, they added that they're planning to move to Israel, make Aliyah. And they got a letter from the Rebbe. The letter was all about the pregnancy and a bracha for, I don't know how the Rebbe wrote it, but it was a standard nusach, giving them a bracha for the pregnancy and for the delivery and not whatever the Rebbe does. The Rebbe signs his name, P.S. About your mention of Israel, it's not advised. I think it's what he wrote. I asked him the story 5 times. He's told me the story 5 times, and I still don't tell it correctly. But I think that's the. So it's not advised. What does that mean? It's not advised. I didn't even ask him. I heard it from the mister. I didn't. I told the Rebbe we're moving to Israel. And the Rebbe's answer was it's not advised. So he comes to a shliach, a very important man, and he says, "Hey, what does this mean that advised?" He says, "Listen." He wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered, "You have to listen." He says, "Why? Why? I didn't even ask." So he tried to explain to him how holy the Rebbe is and how important the Rebbe is. And everyone's talking to the wall. He's moving. Rabbi Steinzat, Rabbi Din Even Yisrael, comes to that city where they live for a speaking engagement. And the shliach says to Rabbi Even Yisrael, "You have to speak to this man. Because he got an instruction from the Rebbe and he just doesn't understand how important it is." So he sat down with him. And he said something to the effect like, "The Rebbe just gave you an amazing shlichus in America." That's how he framed it. He didn't say, "Don't go to Israel, you have a shlichus." That man became a multi-millionaire. He's given so much tzedakah, you have no idea. And it comes from 3 words in a letter, not advised. But he listened. That's the miracle. Because often when you get such directions from the Rebbe, especially if you didn't ask. So you don't. So sometimes if you don't listen, you find out. Sometimes you don't listen, you don't find out. But the thing about the Rebbe is he came across as such a regular person, but he wasn't. He was the Rebbe. You gotta listen. There was a chassid here in America, a very, very big chassid, who he came to New York in 1939 as representative of the previous Rebbe. Then the war started. And he wanted to go back to Poland. And the previous Rebbe said, "Bring your family to America." And instead of bringing his family to America, he tried to get back into Poland. So the Rebbe told the others of the Lubavitchers around to make sure that he doesn't get back into Poland. Anyway, he stayed here and he lost his family. The Rebbe said, "Bring your family to America," and he wanted to go back to Poland. How would you think of that, such a thing? So he would say for the rest of his life, he was a very big chassid. He was a very, very big chassid. Medaf Folgen, you have to do what you're told. When it comes to Rebbe, you gotta listen. He lost his wife. Medaf Folgen, you have to listen. You don't have to understand, you have to listen. It didn't make any sense to him. Why shouldn't he go be with his family? And the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, had to arrange with other Lubavitchers in America to not let him leave the country, to as they say in Yiddish, to put obstacles in front of his return to Poland. They would have killed him for sure. So, here's a maimer that 2/3 of it, or whatever, 3/5 of it, were dedicated to saying, don't get excited by miracles. Don't be a Jew because of miracles. Be a Jew because of conviction. Having said that very emphatically and very clearly in a very resonating way, he says, wait, now that we established that, miracles are not nothing. Miracles are not nothing. So much of Yiddishkeit is supported and founded on miracles, right? So this is the other side of that coin. So let's read, please. Page 128, Sif Vav. And you know how I do this, right? I read only the underlined. However, Gam al Yedei Yediyas Hamatiyas. Even by simply knowing the truth of Hashem, even if I don't experience it, Mizbarid ha'inyan shu nimtza, you know for sure that he exists. Meaning, even though in this maimer, the Tzemach Tzedek argued that to give credibility to Torah, to give credibility to Nevuah, and on some level, to give credibility to God, it's not enough to have proof that he exists. You want to experience him, and experiencing him is Nevuah, is prophecy directly, as all the Jewish people at Har Sinai experience Nevuah. But if you don't experience Nevuah, you still have a pretty good idea that Eibishter exists because of the miracles that he performs. And he continues, this is why in our faith, in our tradition, in our history, there are so many miracles and so many signs, right? Ois means a sign, Moifis means a miracle. And it depends which commentary you read, whether Ois means a sign within nature, and Moifis means a sign which is outside of nature, or vice versa. Bottom line, these are 2 words that both mean that you have something happening in your life which tells you there's a God, and he's around. And he's in charge. He exists, he's around, and he's in charge. A sign, an indication, a proof. Said the Rebbe says, Shabahem, Ba'ayodam, Mizbarid, Amitis, Metzias, Hashem, Yizbarach. Even though it's not prophecy, you're not experiencing him yourself. Does anybody know what Hebrew words would denote experiencing him yourself? Lachvot. It's not the word I'm looking for. No, Mahus. Prophecy would be Mahus. Having evidence of Hashem without prophecy would be Metzias. So when you see a miracle and you don't experience the godliness of a miracle, you have the Metzias, but you don't have the Mahus. The whole Tzemach Tzedek's addition over the Rambam is this word Mahus. But now the Tzemach Tzedek says, but listen, a miracle is still something. Okay, because it manifests the Metzias of Elokus. So seeing miracles, experiencing miracles really, really helps us feel that the Eibishter is real, right? It really, really helps us feel that the Eibishter is real. I don't even know where to begin, but it's funny how on the one hand, our lives are so based on miracles, and on the other hand, we feel so like Hashem's not around. It's a funny thing. All of us have miracles in our lives, but at the same time, all of us don't have miracles in our lives. Hashem has this way of playing hide and seek, where on the one hand, he's so clearly present, and on the other hand, where is he, And I suppose in Israel at this particular moment, those sentiments are both very crystallized. They're very crisp and clear. There is this mix of unbelievable good and unbelievable pain. One, for the presence of Hashem, which is over it, and B, for the alleged, for the apparent, complete, hiding his face. Haster panim, Hashem hiding his face. I'm not going to try and explain it. I'm just simply observing. Our Maimah speaks to the aspect of seeing and experiencing him. So the Rebbe says, so miracles, seeing signs of Hashem, make the Eibishter quite real. Moreover, I'm reading inside Kindalach, and the fact that there is a concept of Hashgacha Pratis in our lives, and the fact that there is a phenomena of God being intimate with people. Those are three things here, people. Miracles prove that there is a God. Miracles prove that this God is not stuck in the heavens, but he actually has managing control over the earth. And miracles prove that there can be an idea of Hashem being intimate with a human being, meaning that the human being can experience Hashem, to use her word, at a level of Mohus. Okay? So miracles prove God, that'll be get. Miracles prove Hashgacha is more involved. Why? Why is miracles proving Hashgacha more involved?
He cares about the details.
Okay. So let's speak first American, and then we'll speak philosophy, okay? In America, they do studies all the time, right? They do these, what do they call them? Surveys. And they say, most Americans believe in God. I think the number is 80 or 90%. Most Americans, far more, at least they say they believe in God. Europeans say so in a far lower number. And again, that's what they say. What do they believe? I don't know, but that's the official position. Most Americans believe in God, but most Americans aren't religious. What's the difference? I believe God exists. I don't believe I need to engage in having a relationship with him. Part of the way of explaining that is, you could believe Hashem created the world and believe that the world follows predictable laws of nature and Hashem doesn't make sin. There's a very big difference between believing in God and believing in miracles. There's a very big difference between believing in God and believing in the divine hand and believing in divine providence. Divine providence doesn't mean Hashem exists, but Hashem is involved in our world. And most people in America believe that Hashem exists and he created the world, but not necessarily do every single one of those people believe that Hashem cares, as you said, about the details. That's the difference between Hashem existing and Hashgacha. And the Tzemach Tzedek says miracles prove all three things: that Hashem exists, that Hashgacha Pratis is real, and that prophecy can happen. So the philosophy of this, the fancy way to say this is, and again, I don't want to give long speeches, but just a very short speech. There was a guy named Aristotle. You all have heard of Aristotle. Everybody knows of Aristotle, right? Rambam wrote his Meir Devuchim revolving around Aristotle's philosophy, except for one little teeny tiny detail. Otherwise, it's exactly like Aristotle. On every core belief, he brings Aristotle and argues with him. I found it fascinating. People say Rambam was an Aristotelian philosopher. he was Aristotelian philosopher, just like Einstein was a Newtonian physicist. You understand? Except for the fact that he argues him on every issue, he was exactly like him. What is true is he liked his approach. He felt that Aristotle's philosophy was closer to objective. He felt he wasn't playing games. It was real logic. But in all the courses, he disagrees. One of the biggest, Aristotle believed in God. Aristotle believed in God. And you know what else? Aristotle was a complete heretic, complete atheist. Now, how do you believe in God and be a heretic? A heretic is the wrong word. Aristotle believed in God, but what word should I use? Aristotle had a philosophical principle which said that God is perfect and God is unchanging and God is unchangeable, which led Aristotle to a question. If God is involved in a changing world and every day the world gives him new information, new data, that means by effect, by impression, God is changing. And if you understand God as a philosopher and understand that God's definition is perfection and can't be improved upon, that would mean God cannot be involved in anything which changes, because if he's involved in anything which changes, he changes himself, which defies his definition of God. So Aristotle had a philosophical need to say, a logical argument to the effect that if God is perfect, he cannot be, that he isn't, he cannot be involved in the changing world, because that would make him always God, not God. Now, the Rambam had the same problem as Aristotle, but the Rambam found a solution. The Rambam solution, and I'm not going to explain to you why, but I'll just tell you the solution. You can read about the Meir Nevuchim at length. He is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. The famous quote that's in Tanya chapter 2, he is the knowledge, the knower, the known. That's the Rambam's quote. He is the knowledge, the knower, the known is brought by Rambam as an answer to this argument of Aristotle, that if God is perfect, he can't be involved in a changing world, because that would change him in effect. And the answer to that, he is the knowledge, the knower, the known. How that answers the question, you can look, I think it's chapter 68 or 69 in the Guide to the Perplexed, section 1, and you can read it, and I wish you a lot of luck understanding it. Please don't ask me any questions. But, so Aristotle believed in Hashem, but he not only believed that there isn't Hashgacha Pratis, he believed there cannot be Hashgacha Pratis. There cannot be Hashgacha Pratis. And there's another level. Not only did Aristotle believe there cannot be Hashgacha Pratis, Aristotle believed there can't even be Yediyah. What that means? Hashem can't even know what's going on. Not only he can't interfere and change it, he can't be involved in a changing world, because simply in fact, if he gets new information in his computer, that makes him no longer God. So Aristotle believed in Hashem, but he believed that Hashem stirs the pot, makes the soup, and when the soup is cooking, he goes away. Because he's unchanging, and his involvement with the world is in a way that doesn't change him, so he cannot be in the world as the world goes through its dynamics, its changes. So he believed in Hashem. Not only did he not believe in the possibility of Hashgacha Pratis, he didn't even believe in Yediyah. Now, says the Tzemach Tzedek, when a miracle happens, what does it show? That not only God exists, and not only God knows what's going on, he mixes in. Yeah, but what about Aristotle's problem? So again, I'm not explaining it to you, but this is the truth of the matter. The Rambam resolves the question that Aristotle has by saying God and the world are one and the same, and that there's no time. So whatever he knows, he always knew. Whatever he's going to know already happened in his awareness, so there's no change. It's a whole fancy schmancy explanation, but the Rambam resolves Aristotle's question logically and says, no, there is Yediyah. He does know what's going on. And now there's the idea, there's actually Hashgacha. There's actually, it was the word intervention. And there's not only Hashgacha, there's miracles. Hashgacha Pratis can be his controlling nature, miracles. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, even though I spent an entire mimer downplaying miracles, but they're not nothing. Anytime you see a miracle, there's proof there's an Eibishter. Anytime there's a miracle, there's proof that this Eibishter knows what's happening on this world. Anytime there's a miracle, there's a proof that this Eibishter, who knows what's happening in the world, can actually intervene, mix in, and make a change. And anytime there's a miracle, it teaches us the possibility of prophecy. Now, this last point we can still contend. Really, a miracle proves it could be prophecy. A miracle proves that. What does prophecy mean? That a person, a person could be intimate with God. I don't know how a miracle proves this, but I'm not going to argue that Tzemach said. In other words, I don't want to get all stuck on this. We'll see how the Maimed unfolds. But you see the point. Even though this entire Maimed has downplayed miracles, the Tzemach Tzedek says, now let's play them up. Does anybody wish to speak or comment? What am I going to say now? You're afraid of me. I'm also afraid of me. Let's keep going. As the Ramban writes, in his section of mitzvahs, in the section of negative Rabbis Kinderlach, the Ramban never wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Ramban never wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Rambam did. And the Ramban wrote criticism on the Rambam. The Ramban Sefer HaMitzvahs is really notes where he disagrees with the Rambam. I don't know, he agrees with him 90% of the time. But if he disagrees 10% of the time, that's 60 mitzvahs, you see? So the Ramban has his commentary on the Rambam's collection of mitzvahs. I've told this to you before. There's like 11 different opinions of how you count the 630 mitzvahs. But they're really two basic opinions with a bunch of little arguments, you know. The first is the Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, and the second is the Rambam. And the Bahag got a bunch of people to go with him and argue about a few. The Rambam has a bunch of people to go with him and argue about a few. One of those bunch of people is this Ramban. So the Ramban, that Nachman leaves with an N, writes in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the section of Leisaseh, Shemanahu Siman Aleph, that he lists there as the first Siman, V'zel L'Sheni, and the Rebbe quotes the words of the Ramban directly. And it's interesting because he puts it in Leisaseh. Quote, Yitzel L'Sheni, you see V'zel L'Sheni, these are his words directly. Yetzias Mitzrayim, the event of the Exodus. Shenase be'eses, that Hashem did it before in Oises. Oises means signs, but I guess in context we'll call it miracles. Mechudashim. Mechudashim means that they're novel. That means they're new. That means they create a new nature, new rules. Mishanim atoldos, that change the order of things based on pattern, right? That changes what's normal. Moedim are a proof elalaka for Hashem. Number one, that there's a God. Yeah. Miracles prove that there's an Eibush. That's what the Ramban writes. Why? Because how could they happen? Now let's go back to Aristotle for fun. Let's go back to Aristotle for a minute. Okay? I want to ask you a question. If you would come to Aristotle and show him a miracle, what would he say? And you can do this with a professor in a university today. If you would come to Aristotle and show him something which doesn't make sense within the parameters of the philosophical order, something happened which is out of the limitations of nature, what would he say? Huh?
Random. Like.
But it's against nature. It shouldn't happen. It's against nature.
You say like the laws of nature are changing?
He would say the law of nature is changing. Okay, when you said it's true, I would say something else. Aristotle would say we're missing facts. We don't have enough information. If we would know all the facts, we would see that it's actually not a miracle, it's nature. He would say that every time. He has to say that. Because since Aristotle doesn't only say miracles don't happen, Aristotle says miracles can't happen. Why not? Hashem made the world. He gave it rules, and he doesn't mix in. Not only doesn't mix in, he can't mix in, right? Not only can't mix in, he doesn't even know what's going on, according to Aristotle. So when something happens, he can't explain, Aristotle says, wait, think about it. We'll create new science. I'll show you the math. I'll make it work. He has to do that every time. And oftentimes he can. I've known incidents where people had machla, had cancer, and then it went away. So medical science has a name for it. In other words, sometimes it happens without the Rebbe. It just happens. And the name for it is the body absorbed it. There's a certain percentage case, I don't know, 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000, there's instances where a person had an illness, and the illness spontaneously left them. So you call it a ness, And they call it an anomaly within nature, meaning an anomaly within nature. It's part of the natural design. We just don't understand it yet. But when we get smarter and we'll know more, we'll see that it all is explicable. I want to tell you something very interesting. This same Ramban, Nachmanides, in Pashas Noach, has a very interesting conversation. It's really I think it's an important conversation to mention, but it's his opinion. You see, one of the things about the Rishonim is they all have their own opinions. And one of the beautiful things about us is that we don't have to pick. We can agree with all of them. Sometimes there's contradictions, but you take all the Rishonim. I love to do this when I teach Chumash and I have enough time to prepare. I bring in all the Rishonim. All the Rishonim. There's Rashi, there's Rasag, there's Ramban, there's Even Ezra, there's the Radak. And there's others. There's the Sefornu. There's a whole bunch of Rishonim, Pirush and Chumash, and when you collect it all together, you get such a beautiful, colorful image because each one says something different. Sometimes they contradict one another, and sometimes they become a beautiful synthesis. They become a harmony, like a cacophony, a collection of sound that sounds like an orchestra. It sounds like an orchestra. It's very beautiful when you put them all together. But the Ramban has a kasha, and I guess you can say that the Rambam says the same thing. It says in the Medrash called Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, which is a very reliable Medrash, that when Avraham was a young man, he broke all of his father's idols, and his father went to Nimrod, and Nimrod threw Avraham Avinu into a fire. And he kept him in that furnace for 3 days, and he kept feeding it. It was hot. It was hundreds of degrees hot, maybe thousands of degrees hot. And after 3 days, Avraham walked out with his shirt on, with his clothes. It says in Pasuk, the Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah were prophets. They were also thrown into the furnace. They came out, but their clothes didn't do so good. You know what I'm saying? They came without their clothes. Avraham came with his shirt and his pants and his suit and his tie and his checkbook and his credit card and his cell phone intact. So the Ramban has a question. How come a story like that is not in the Chumash? Isn't it a wow story? Avraham Avinu's life starts when he's 75 years old. If you think about it, the hardest years of his life were the first 75 years. We don't talk about that. We talk about Avinu once he became famous and great and powerful. And what about the first 7 years when he was all alone, fighting with the whole world? His father had him killed. He didn't die, but he tried. So the Ramban asks, why is that miracle not written in the Chumash? This is a question. And he gives what you'll call a disappointing answer. In the Medrash, Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, written by Rabbi Lezer and Horkanos, it describes the miracle of him being thrown into a furnace. But in the Gemara, which I think is a Masechta Baba Basra, it doesn't say that. It says that Avraham lived in a place called Kuta. Nasa loy nes v'yatza lachon. A miracle happened to the place called Kuta. Kuta is someplace in Iraq or Kazdim, and he left and he went to Haran. Haran is now Syria. It's the Fertile Crescent. They didn't go straight because they went around like this. So he was living here and he went up to here, and then Lech Lecha he came down on this side, which is Eretz Yisrael. In other words, if from your perspective, he was living here, he went up to here, and then he came around. So the Gemara's expression was Nasl Nes V'Sel Haran. A miracle happened to him, and he left Kuta and he went to Haran. But the Gemara doesn't say what the miracle is. So the Ramban proposes that not everybody agrees with the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer that the miracle was they were thrown into a furnace. We know that when Avraham was young, Hashem performed a big miracle for him. The Medrash says he was thrown into a furnace. The Gemara doesn't say what the miracle is. And it's conceivable, says the Ramban, that the miracle which happened to Avraham Avinu at the beginning of his life, which set him on his trajectory trying to be the father of the Jewish people, was what's called in the Ramban's language, Nes Nister. Does anybody speak Hebrew? Nes Nister? A hidden miracle. There's Nes Nisra, Nistar, and Nes Nigla, a hidden miracle and a revealed miracle. A hidden miracle means a miracle that happens within the parameters of nature. No. A revealed miracle is something that breaks nature. And then Ramban gives you a rule. The Torah never tells you stories that you can explain. If you can find science to explain a miracle, that kind of miracle will not be in the Chumash. Because the miracles that the Torah records are undeniable. One second, I'll get you. So the Ramban says the reason the miracle of the furnace, because basically he's saying Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkana says that the miracle was onto the furnace. When you read the Gemara, you get a very different impression. The Gemara doesn't say what the nest was, and it's very conceivable that it was the kind of miracle that if you wanted to explain it away, you could, and therefore it's not recorded. And I don't want to have this debate with you, but there's a difference between Hashgacha Pratis and a miracle within nature and a miracle. There's three different levels. You see it in the Rebbe's Maimonides. How it plays out practically, I mean, Purim is a miracle. Okay? Even though it happened in nature. You see the point? Hey, there's big and there's little. There's a lot and there's a little. So the Ramban is saying that if the Torah tells a story, it's because it's a miracle that Aristotle would have a problem with. He wouldn't be able to say, well, we're missing facts. This is, I mean, you speak to intelligent people today, and I would speak the same way. I'm as big a skeptic as the next person, you know. When something happens that you can't explain, the answer is we need more information. When something happens and you try to explain it and you can't find an explanation, it's called an anomaly. We have a problem. Now, if you believe in Hashem and you believe in Hashgacha Pratis, it's possible Hashem just messed around with the chessboard. He just did what he wanted. But that is a question of faith. You have to believe, right? So the Tzemach Tzedek says, when you see such events, especially if you see one or two or three or four, it convinces you of the presence of Hashem. It convinces you, and again, I'm adding something to the Tzemach Tzedek's words, that Hashem is present in the world. Hashem knows what's happening in the world. It convinces you of miracles. And the fourth thing he says, it convinces you of prophecy. Now, that's the hardest one, because how do miracles prove that Hashem becomes intimate, that people could experience Hashem? This is a very interesting question, but we're leaving that alone. Okay, so anyway, I brought this to Ramban because I just think it's interesting, and it happens to be relevant in this particular context. You had a question.
Yes, so just to clarify, you're saying that the hidden miracle that Ramban says might have happened to Abraham would have been something along the lines of, like what you were saying earlier, like a disease is absorbed back in the body. It's known to happen, but it's rare. Like that, you're saying?
Or the whole world ganged up against him,
right,
and he stood there with a spear and he killed thousands of people. One boom, 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 boom. You could explain it, right?
Right, but it's still
It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I mean, in last week's Parsha, according to Rashi, Avraham and Eliezer defeated 4 armies. Do me a favor. I mean, that story is actually recorded, right? It's a natural, and it's such hashgacha that it's occurring at the same time as this war. We need the Yidden to throw sand, to throw sand. You know what we need? We need the people who are coming out to protest beside Hamas to realize that they should not come out and protest. I said to my students in yeshiva, if you see fewer and fewer people at the Hamas rallies, that's a sign Mashiach is coming. Because that means that all the people who are signing on because they care are realizing we're on the wrong side. That means that people are actually willing to think beyond what the eye says and the heart is triggered. To me, that's a beautiful simon of Mashiach. The people say, I'm not standing with you. I'm not standing with you. Not anymore. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have stood with you. That's such a big deal. It's a very big deal. It's a very big deal. Lani is daiti, in my humble opinion. Anyway, I don't want to get into Hamas because I start, then you got to finish, and then Samachaya. Yes.
So
did I answer you?
yes.
Go ahead.
basically what you're saying is that we have like Nisim Gluim, Nisim Nistarim, but all the Nisim you can explain according to Teva.
That's not true. Yes, Yamsuf.
The water tsunami in the other side and the water was like
And it was dry, and the bottom was Yabasha.
There is. Someone tries to explain that.
I know. So that's his opinion, his perspective. But he only explains, there's a guy, I saw, it's pretty powerful what he does, his documentary. But each nest, the way we understand it, is not fully explained by him. He explains them just basically. Like the Yam Suf split, you want to argue, but that the bed of the Yam Suf is dry, Yabosha, he doesn't have a scientific explanation for that. He doesn't. And the word Yabosha is in Chumash. It's not a Medrash, it's in the Chumash. That means the bed of the sea was dry. Okay. Now let's continue with the Ramban. Does anybody else want to speak? So look at the Ramban. We're on page 128, second paragraph. The line that begins with the word Elokah, it's 7 lines from the bottom. Okay, I'm starting from the beginning again. That Ramban says, Nachmanides says, and he's speaking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus. We celebrate every year Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the Rambam says this also, by the way, the Minchas Chinuch brings this. Part of the reason we make such a big deal at Yetzias Mitzrayim, because Yetzias Mitzrayim was the greatest miracles that ever happened. And those miracles are a punch in the nose to the fact that there's Hashem, and that he knows, and that he's involved, and that he does what he wants, and he wants to move the pawns around, he moves the pawns around. Now let's read the Ramban's words, okay, one at a time. Word number 1, Elokah, there is a God. Number 2, Kadmon, who speaks Hebrew? Okay, who knows philosophy? Kadmon. Prime, what a great word. Kadmon. That this God always existed. That's what it means. If you said Yigdal, it doesn't mean he came before everything. Is that nothing came before him. Kadmon means that he has no beginning. That's the meaning of the word. So a miracle proves God, and a miracle doesn't only prove God, a miracle also proves that God always existed. How is that true? How does a miracle not only prove that Hashem exists, but that Hashem wasn't created? Now, I don't know. I'm not in the Ramban's head, and I don't profess to be. It would be foolish of me to say I know what the Ramban is thinking. But understand what the Ramban says is the Rambam says, you see a miracle, it's a proof not that there is a God, that a God, this God always was. My personal opinion is anything which is created has limitations. And the limitations are imposed by the creator. If you built a machine, right? How do they say it in the language of the generation Z? You make specs. Specs is specifications. You write specs. God made man. He made man with specs, which is why when people say that there shouldn't be free will, they're actually right. I tell you all the time, free will is not something which is natural to man. Free will is only natural to he who wasn't created with any specs. We were created with many specs. Malachim were created with specs. So then how come we have free will? And the only answer is, he gives it to us. He doesn't allow us. Free will is not permitted. Free will is empowered. He has to give you free will by ourselves, based on the specifications which we were created. If you had enough information, you can explain the actions of every person always. We don't have free will based on our nature, because we were created by a creator, and he made a design, and design has specifications, puts limits on us. I think what the Ramban is saying, doing a miracle requires no limitations, because the limitations in the world are a reflection of the creator. If the creator's limited world can be violated by the creator, that means the creator is not limited by the limitations he imposes on the world. The only way that's possible is if he has no limits. And the only way for him not to have a limit is not to have any specs. And if he doesn't have any specs, there's nobody who spected him. That's specs for whatever. We have to come up with a word for that. Who gave him his specifications? So the Ramban says 2 things. And again, I'm not sure this is adequate, but we're going to go with it. Statement number 1, a miracle proves that there's God. Statement number 2, a miracle proves that God always was. When my children ask me, who created Hashem? My children, my students, my answer, the meaning of the word Hashem is that nobody made it. Yeah, but that doesn't make sense. That's the answer. If they wince, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Miracles prove that there's a God, and this God always existed. Questions or comments? Okay, moving on. Next, chafetz. These words are each one of these words are very, very, very important. Chafetz. Anybody? Chafetz. Nobody knows Hebrew?
Chafetz, wanted.
Has desires. No, I have desires. Trust me. I'm not going to tell you about my desires. It's none of your business, right? You have desires. Don't tell me yours. I don't know. They're none of my business, right? People have desires, right? But first of all, there's 2 kinds of desires in the human experience. What are they? Desires that come from weakness and desires that come from strength. Or to say it in other words, desires that we fulfill by being lazy and desires that we fill by being energetic, correct? Hashem has desires. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he only has the second type. Desires that come from weakness. Hashem is missing weakness. Never. he has no tivus. We say nisave. It's tivus, but not weaknesses. I translate the word tivus as weakness. Nisava means Hashem has the desire, but it's not weakness, it's a strength. Hashem has desires. Desires come from strength. Now, why is this important? Because again, you get to Aristotle. If God is perfect and unchanging, what does he want? What could he possibly want? He cannot want anything specific, because anything specific is going to be limited in relationship with his perfection. So if he's perfect and you can't add from him, you can't detract from him, subtract from him, there cannot be a thing he wants, because a thing is a limit. A thing is a specific attribute, a specific reality, a specific situation, a specific event. A perfect God is too perfect from wanting, unless he wants to be. If it's a particular want, he can't have it, which is a shayla. And Aristotle have a problem with this, which is why the Ramban talks about it. And the Ramban says, I don't know how to explain it, but why did he make a miracle on Kingston Avenue and not on Albany? Because he wanted. Meaning to say that this perfect God can interface with the world in a way which is not consistent with that perfection. He's doing the miracle here. He's not the word chayfetz means he can have desires, meaning even though he's perfect, his perfection is not a prison. His perfection, his infinity doesn't make him useless. His infinity doesn't make him that he can't relate to anything outside of his own infinity because he's perfect. If you think about it, this is a very powerful idea, right? A lot of people say Davish is perfect and therefore Davish is useless. Why Davish is useless? Because we're not perfect, and perfect gods have no business with an imperfect world. So the Ramban says, oh, no. A miracle is proof he exists. A miracle is Soma proof he always existed. And a miracle's proof is that even though he's perfect, he can have desires for particular things. A perfect God can have desires to engage with an imperfect world in a specific way. Does it make sense? Not that he has desires, but what he desires. Probably not. But he has desires. Hashem has wants. What's the proof? Please, somebody finish a sentence.
Creative.
He wants us. He wants to bite with the.
Don't give me a chasidus. We're in the middle of a conversation, right? What is the proof that Hashem has desires? In this conversation, huh? Because he performed the miracle. He did it. The proof that Hashem has wants is because we're seeing the effect of that want. He decided to get involved here and now. Not there and then, but here and now. Why? I don't know why. But I know what? When you see a miracle, it proves that there is a God. Somehow it proves that this God always existed, and it proves that even though he's perfect, that perfection doesn't mean that he can't do anything, because his perfection doesn't allow for anything which is less than perfect. He can choose a particular place, particular time, particular person. I'm helping this person, not this one. Why? I don't want it. Chayfetz. Now, I would argue that it's above logic. It's a chayfetz. The Rambam would say, no, there's an explanation in his world. You have to just understand what David is thinking. It has to do with the cosmic picture, I have a great story to support this. A great story. I think it's a great story. Maybe you're not going to think it's so great. There's a country in the bottom of Africa called South Africa. South Africa has been through an enormous amount of turmoil in the last 40 years, 50 years, right? It was an apartheid state. An apartheid state means it was really racist. The Rebbe told Rabbi Bernard that it's Hepech HaHalacha. That's not allowed. You can't have two classes of people. You're not allowed to do it. The Rebbe says it's against Allah. Rabbi Bernard was a very outspoken critic of apartheid, and it's a nest that he survived. So they abolished the apartheid government, and they got a unified government, whatever. We're not talking South African politics. Is South Africa better off or worse off? It's not the point. But the white people panicked, especially the Jews, because there was a lot of anger, justifiable anger in many cases, from the African citizens to the whites, because they were suppressed, they were exploited. It was their country. We came from Europe, took over their country, took all the wealth for ourselves. And the Rebbe reassured the community of South Africa that there's nothing to fear. The Rebbe said publicly many times, he wrote, South Africa will be a safe place for Jewish people till Mashiach comes. And the Rebbe's words carried so much weight that many people, many non-Lubavitchers, thousands of people, stayed on that word. A lot of people left. Whole community of South Africa left. You go to, I forgot what's something. There's communities of South Africans all over the world.
Joburg.
Huh?
Joburg?
No, out of. There are communities of South Africans who moved to California, San Diego, but I'm thinking about some places. There's places we have huge communities transplanted, but a lot of them stayed. And they stayed to a great extent under Rebbe's word. So here's the story. Above South Africa is another country called Zimbabwe. And there was a shliach in Zimbabwe whose name is Rabbi Klein, who now lives in South Africa. He's a shaykhit. So when he heard that the Rebbe had written that South Africa is to be a safe place for Jews till Mashiach comes, he wrote the Rebbe a letter and said the Rebbe should say that Zimbabwe will be a safe place for Jews till Mashiach comes. And the Rebbe's answer was, I said South Africa is going to be a safe place for Jews till Mashiach comes. Now, what would it hurt the Rebbe to say? Zimbabwe will also be a safe place for Jews. What does that cost? It's a few words, Rebbe, just write it. What do you care? I don't know. But he refused, and Zimbabwe fell. It's one of the worst economies in the world. Everybody left. Why South Africa, yeah, and Zimbabwe, no? Why? There's a medrash that describes when the Eibishter created the world, he randomly decided where people are going to live, where's going to be desert. Why? There's a chazal where Adam Rishon was geyser that people are going to settle. There's communities, there's countries, there's people. And where he wasn't geyser, there's no people. Why? But that's all. So Chayfetz, again, a philosopher would say that there's a logic. I don't need to say that there's a logic, but there's something about it. And I think the right would be, it's irregular. When a perfect God has a particular desire, it's not part of a pattern. Because the pattern is that he's perfect. And perfect means either he does everything everywhere or he does it nowhere. Chayfetz means he chooses one spot, one person, one circumstance. That's it's inconsistent with his perfection and his wholeness. And the Eibishter, in spite of his perfection, is not limited by, he is free to desire. Can we explain his desire? Maybe. Can we explain desire? Maybe not. But when you see a miracle, it's proof of a desire. Because if he did every miracle he could possibly do, every place in the world, every single time, then it wouldn't be a miracle. Nachon? You follow? So that's the meaning of the word chayfetz. Anybody want to speak? If you don't speak, I'm keeping on going. Okay? V'yachol, this is a great word, v'yachol. Yachol means he's free. Yachol means he can. He can. Remember when Obama ran for president? I don't know how old you are. We can. Not we will, we can. Yachol means Hashem can. There's nothing Hashem cannot. The word that is used most importantly in the free will conversation is not the word bechira. It's the word yacholas, possibility. Along with the word yachas comes the word yachos. The Ramban uses these words. Every one of these words is a book, literally a book of philosophy. Alakah, kadmein, chafetz, yachel. Every one of these words is a deep philosophical and theological discussion. And that's why the Ramban uses them, because they're reflecting how much of the greatness of Hashem we are informed of by the performance of one miracle. Hashem is free. What free means? He can, and you know what else? He cannot. He doesn't have to. If he has to, then he must. If he can and he cannot, that means he's free. He does as he wishes. So chayfetz denotes his ability to be, like I said before, I think it's I don't know if it's the proper English, but the word irregular works for me. Hashem is doing something irregular juxtaposed against how we understand him regular. The word Yacham means he's free. He can do whatever he wants. And he doesn't have to, he doesn't have to. He could do it, and he could not do it. It's up to him. Questions or comments? And I warn you, you have nothing to say, I keep walking. And finally, Machadesh. He innovates, he changes, he brings newness, he changes, right? Again, you go back to Aristotle, the Eibishter makes the world, and he leaves it alone till it falls to pieces. Then he makes it again and leaves it alone till it falls to pieces. It takes a while to fall to pieces, but however, whatever they call millions of years, thousands of years, when the world falls to pieces, the Eibishter gets involved, stirs it back together, gives it order, and boom, leaves it alone. Mechadish means that at any time, at any place, Abish can come in and change something, and even change it in a permanent way. So even though our Maimed has been downplaying miracles, miracles inform us of an enormous alat. There is a God, he always existed, he can do what he wants, he's free, and he can make changes in the world. That's a big list, 5 words, but these 5 words are literally 5 books. Questions or comments? No comments, no questions. I keep going. She'inyan Yitzias Mitzrayim, the idea of the Exodus, the story of the Exodus, the event of the Exodus, the miracle of the Exodus, liyoidov, to those who know it. And of course, today, there's many people say it never happened. I had once a student, this goes back 30 years, here in Mechon Chana. Her mother was a historian. I don't know what she was, but she really was an intelligent woman. And she spent a Friday night meal in the house, and she taught me many things. I had a book at home that I didn't understand, and she explained it to me. There was an Egyptian pharaoh called Akhenaten. And this pharaoh Akhenaten received 300 tablets, 200 letters for the community of the Hittites, I guess what they would call them, living in Canaan, warning about El Kabiru. El Kabiru means wanderers. El Kabiru is Egyptian for what we call Ivri, that are invading our borders, and begging Akhenaten to come and support them. And in these 300 tablets, which are extant, they're in museums, they say, you're the most powerful king in the region. We all pay tribute to you. You're like our God. You must help us. And you know what Akhenaten does? What does Akhenaten do? Take a wild guess. He does nothing, right? You listen to the Rebbe and nothing happened. So what happened? Now, why do you think Akhenaten passed up an opportunity to use his muscle? Why? Why? Because he got pummeled by these El Kabiru guys. But that's not in the tablets. So is there proof? Is there historical evidence? Is there archaeological evidence for Yetzias Mitzrayim? First of all, some people think there's a lot of it. There's a big debate about even how the dating goes. But we have proof of the Yidden going into Eretz Yisrael and the Knaanim pleading for help and Mitzrayim refusing to help them. Why Mitzrayim refused to help is not in the record. But the only explanation plausible is that they were afraid. So this is indirect evidence to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, I have a different proof of Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's an old book that they was recently published. It's kind of popular, and some people believe that it's historical. It's called the Bible. You may have heard of it, the Bible. The Bible has a similar record, I don't need... I'm just sharing it because people like to dray a cup and say it didn't happen, or... They have a certain record of history. Based on the record of history, there's no evidence. There's evidence that you have to move it back 500 years earlier. In other words, the dating is off. If you go back a few hundred years before, there's evidence of many, many things which have to do with the history of the world as it's prescribed, as it's written in the Torah. But if you know that the Exodus happened, you know a lot of stuff about the Eibishter. And he continues, look inside. Mishatek kol koifer, it quiets any denier of bechidush. Hebrew, please, bechidush. In the newness of the world. Now, let's be fancy. Okay, we love being fancy. Chas v'shalom, we should be simple. Then people will actually understand what we're saying, right? The whole point is to sound smart, not to be smart. Bechidush means yesh me'ayin. In other words, Aristotle believes Hashem created the world. But Aristotle did not believe in matter coming from nothing. Aristotle believed in the Chomer Rishon Kadme, but he called it Adam, what they call the Greek Adam, always existed. He doesn't believe Hashem made the world from nothing. It means that the material of creation, the matter of creation existed in a nebulous form, in a vague form, in a discombobulated form. And God's contribution is to make it order, make it beautiful. But that means God's not really a creator. He's simply a former. Like you have in Tanya chapter 2, Shari Yichud, you take the clay which already exists, you take the shape which you have in your imagination, you put them together and you have a bowl. So that Aristotle's idea of the Eibushter being a creator is not really a creator, it's really a former. Because he doesn't believe in Yesh Mayayin. And then Ramban says a miracle doesn't only prove that there's a God and that God can get involved, but he can create new, which means Yesh Mayayin, okay? So miracles like that of Yetzias Mitzrayim quiet the voice of the heretics regarding Chiddush, the ability to create was nothing. It preserves faith. B'yediyas alakah. Now you can translate b'yediyas alakah in two ways, but what's the correct way to translate it? B'yediyas alakah? Take a guess.
No.
No.
From Hashem's knowledge.
That Hashem knows. B'yediyas alakah, that Hashem knows. Because Aristotle believes Hashem doesn't know. Not only does he know, he can get involved and move the pawns around. And his freedom to operate bepratim or beklolim kulam in the little details of the world and in the cosmos as a whole. Echo, atkan l'shay. This is the end of the Ramban. So the Ramban says that even though in this Maimer we've really downplayed miracles, but you know what? How they say it in yeshivas, it's not so simple. Are we good, people? We good? Yeah? Let's turn the page. It's, what is it, 12 o'clock? I mean, if you want to break, I'll let you go at 10 after. At this point, it doesn't make sense to break. I lost track of time, or I acted like I lost track of time. Okay, so if you turn the page, now we're on page Samachay, which is the last page of this Maimet, in case you didn't know that this Maimet had an end. It says, we're continuing to read along the lines of Chiddush, right? What was the last thing I showed you in the Ramban? Chiddush, Yediyah, Hashgacha, and Yochel, right? 4 things. Hashem can create, Hashem knows, Hashem can get involved, and Hashem is free to do what he wishes. So on page Samachay, the Rebbe continues bringing from the Sfarim about creating Yesh Mayayin. So he says these words: "Liyes is havas agashnias meharuchnias." The event of creating a physical thing, not from a different physical thing, which would be Yesh Miyesh Raksha B'Shan Hatzura, which is simply being a former, which is Aristotle's notion of God, but creating from spiritual material, meaning from nothing something, where there is no matter. Is absolutely impossible. Cannot happen through a series of causal events. In other words, if you have an idea in your brain and you make the idea dumber and even dumber and even dumber and even dumber and even dumber, it's never going to become a grain of sand. It's just not going to happen. Ruchnius remains Ruchnius and Gashmius is always Gashmius. But the Eibushter created the world. Before he created it, not it was a different world, it wasn't the world. And that cannot be explained logically. It doesn't exist in the parameters of nature. It's been called Yesh Mayayin. Right? Yesh Mayayin doesn't mean something from nothing. It means something from a non-thing. Or as we say it in fancy, Achar Hed, that after nothing. Yesh Mayayin. And the miracle is proof of Chiddush, of the Eibush and the ability to create Yesh Mayayin. And again, since I keep going back to the Rambam, I might as well add this as well. The Rambam's made a Nevuchim. Like I said to you before, he writes like an Aristotelian philosopher, except for one little tiny detail. Every big issue he disagrees with Aristotle. Every big thing. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. I remember when the United States invaded Iraq in 1991 and 2, under the George Bush the father. So the general that was I don't know what the right word is. He was overseeing the entire war was a man named Schwarzkopf, General Schwarzkopf, and he was very entertaining, and he did interviews, and at some point he said, He's not a statistician. He's not a strategist, and he's not the tactician. He's not this and not this. That Harstam Hussein was a useless. He was such a terrible opponent. He was such a poor opponent, and he went through a whole bunch of things he's not. And they said, otherwise, he's a brilliant military man. Otherwise, he's a brilliant. The guy doesn't know what he's doing, and he's a failure and destroyed his people, destroyed his country, destroyed his mother. Otherwise, a genius, the mother of all battles. Otherwise, he's a brilliant military man. Anyway. Why did I just bring that up? Why did I bring that up? There's a reason I'm saying it.
It's very soft.
Huh?
Because very soft.
It'll come back to me. Aristotle believed that the matter of which the world is created always existed, and Hashem simply gave it form. Oh, this one to say that the Rambam has many, as I said, the reason I bring it up is the Rambam argues with Aristotle about this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Otherwise, he was a brilliant philosopher. And that's what my point. Yeah. Every big issue, Hashgacha Pratis, creation, concern for the world, goodness, the whole list. Every big deal that Aristotle says is explained in cold logic that Rambam disagrees with and defends his positions. The biggest argument that he has with Aristotle, the argument that the Rambam gets most thoughtful about and deliberate and even tentative is the question of Yesh Me'ayin. It consumes the Rambam. You see that the Rambam felt that it's very hard for him to prove. All the other issues that Rambam just disagrees and he gives you his position and goes on. Yesh Me'ayin is a story. It occupies the center of the second section of the Mir Nevuchim, where you see that the Rambam himself is struggling to make his case. He argues unequivocally that material once did not exist and Hashem made it from nothing or from a non-thing. Aristotle said that that's impossible. It can't be. It's logically impossible, therefore false. Philosophers believe that anything which is logically impossible is a lie, which officially the Rambam agrees with. And the Rambam says, no, it's not true. It's not illogical for material to be made from non-material, and therefore it's not impossible. And it's the biggest argument that they have. The biggest argument that the Rambam has with Aristotle, in other words, the place where you see that Rambam struggling most to present you his theology is on the question of Yesh Me'ayin. And I like to say personally that the Alter Rebbe started the Tanya, but the Rambam finished the Moira. The first thing in Tanya is Yesh Me'ayin. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't prove it. He says it as a fact. He's leaning on Aristotle. In the wording of the Ramban, that's Chiddush. To make where nothing was. Not to make from one thing another thing, to make where nothing was. And the Ramban is saying that miracles are a proof even of that. Ki es havos, hagashmis, meruchnius, created from a physical from non-physical things, which we're calling spiritual things. Hu k'meis havos milei davar al davar. It's like creating from nothing into something. To make from an idea, a stone, is the same thing as making a stone from nothing. Even though an idea isn't nothing. But the distance between an idea and a stone is so large that it's I'm using a bad word now, okay, so don't listen. It's basically the same thing as creating from nothing. There's no distinction.
But you said the Alter Rebbe was leaning on Aristotle?
And the Rambam.
Oh.
The Rambam argues Yesh Me'ayin against Aristotle. The Alter Rebbe is leaning on the Rambam. When you read Tanya, you don't even know the controversy. The our Rabbeim were very careful not to give people room for doubt. It wasn't part of their job description. They weren't professors, they were Rebbes. So they give you their theology in a way that you don't even know where it comes from. And their theology is very, very faith-based. It's done in such a way that when you study it, it can only make your emunah stronger, it can't possibly make your emunah weaker. It's written that way. It's designed that way. The Rebbe doesn't say everything he thinks. The complicated stuff he leaves out. And the Chassidim say, don't go there and read it. What are the problems? But
Because he doesn't bring sources, or because he is selective in what he's bringing?
Both. And he doesn't bring the source. The source, the idea, the Rambam argued Yesh Me'ayin vehemently. There's no issue in Mir Nevuchim that you see the Rambam valuing and defending, and I'm going to say this word, struggling with, like the question of Yesh Me'ayin. And the Alter Rebbe starts the Shara Yechbud, he starts with Yesh Me'ayin. And he builds on Yesh Me'ayin, Hashgacha Pratis, and Yediyah, and miracles, and prophecy, and revelation. If you believe in Yesh Me'ayin, you believe that God has to be involved every second. If you believe in Yesh Miyash, you don't believe Hashem has to be involved every second. So Aristotle, very conveniently, since he didn't believe Hashem made the world from nothing, believes Hashem makes the world and leaves it alone. The Rambam says, no, Hashem makes the world from nothing. So the Alter Rebbe says, if he makes the world from nothing, every second he has to renew it or it'll disappear. If he's renewing this world every single second, how could he not be involved? Can't be. So it becomes the linchpin, it becomes the axis around which all the core beliefs that we have rotate. If Hashem creates the world from nothing, he's got to be here every instant that the world disappears. If he's here, he's in charge, he's involved, he knows. Yeah, what about all the questions? We give answers. And really, hu amad and oidei, he's the knowledge and knowledge is a very big piece of that puzzle. But the Yesh Me'ayin is the kernel that sets up all the other issues that we argue about. So let's just finish this paragraph, okay? Therefore, there's no way for creation to come in a way that's called chiddush, from non-existence, from an infinite power of the Eibishter himself. Hashem is free to do what he wishes, and therefore, Hashem can make a world where no world existed at all. So the Rebbe is a little bit, I didn't read a whole paragraph. I just read what little bits and pieces. I really thought we were going to finish today. It was a pretty good learn. The point of today's class, in a sentence, is we spent an entire series of classes playing down miracles, and now the Rebbe says, relax. Miracles are pretty cool. They're important. They're not everything, not the most important thing, but they're very important. Questions or comments?
Well, do I ever say that? Or someone said saying that?
Someone said it. Where did you learn before you came here?
Just few,
This is your second year.
like, I started in December, so it's in the first 2 weeks.
Oh.
Went to Mahal
You have a higher education before?
college, but
What do you study?
health sciences and human rights.
Say it again.
Health sciences,
Health. What does that mean? Health science. I don't know what that means.
like pre-health, like biology, but more geared towards like health,
And what else?
human anatomy, and health, human rights.
Politics, social
Yeah,
science.
Yeah,
God gave you a good brain. Use it for good things.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
I don't have the compliments easy. Trust me.
Wow.
Take it.
You're out of it too.
You have to use it. Okay. God bless everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Okay. Good afternoon. We didn't know what you always do, so we decided